Mr. Greg Gagne, it is a true honor to have you on Territory Marks.
Well, Zach, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hear a lot of great things about you and your podcasts. And TA and I have one, and we're just trying to keep up with you. And
Yeah,
we're
I mean,
watching you guys.
before we like get into you as a person or as a wrestler, et cetera, you are in the podcast world with Magnum T.A, right?
Yeah, we started. We've got 10 shows now. It's called Straight Talk with Magnum T.A and Greg Gagne, and we give it to you the way we felt it, the way we saw it, and the way we lived it. We're having a good time doing it. And TA is just a wonderful guy to have it on with. He's well educated, does a great job, great speaker, and he's my partner in Powertown, which is our action figure line and merchandising line for 255 former professional wrestlers, men, women, the little people, the referees, the promoters.
Oh my
We've got
gosh.
everybody on board, but we started that back in the 50s when the guys that really built TV wrestling on the DuPont network out of Chicago.
So really quickly, what's your relationship with Magnum? How long have you known each other? Like the
You
inception of
know,
this podcast is pretty interesting to me.
we crossed paths, oh man, quite a few years ago, only one time. He was on a card we had at White Sox Park in Chicago, and he was on the card, and I believe he wrestled Ric Flair that night. And we talked, and we kind of really we have the same feeling for everything,
Okay.
you know, not only wrestling but life in itself. And I was looking for when Steve Rosenthal, who originally did our Remco toys with the AWA, we're the first wrestling company of action figures. And it's quite a story with Steve. He was in New York, that's where he lived. His son was a WWF fan at that time and liked wrestling. So Steve went. He was working with Remco at the time. Went to Vince McMahon and said, Vince, here's my company. We do action figures, and we like to do professional wrestlers. And Vince, they talked for quite a while, and he said, well, let me see the contract. And he says, okay, I want this, this, and this changed. So Steve left, went back, got the contract changed the way Vince wanted it. Vince looked at it, he said, nah, change this, this, and this.
Hmm.
And he said, okay, are we set now? Yep. Came back. Oh, and he said, I need some upfront money. So Steve went back to the company, came back a third time, had the upfront money, had the contract the way Vince had it. He said, well, here's the contract. And Vince threw a magazine at him. He said, do you know these people? He said, yeah, they're my competitors. Well, I signed a deal with them. So
Wow.
typical Vince McMahon. So anyhow, from there, he looked and found that the AWA was actually the covered the biggest territory in all the country. We were from Winnipeg to St. Louis to the West Coast,
Right.
and the talent we had was phenomenal from top to bottom. I mean, on the card was all main event guys, and so he came to Vern, cut a deal with them, did the Remco toys, ran it for 7 years. It was the most successful thing they ever did. And he retired. Just before he retired, he started the Karate Kid, and
That's right.
that went bananas for him in the Ninja Turtles. So
Right.
he retired, and he called me back 2.5 years ago. He said, "How'd you like to get in the action figure business?" I said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" He said, "Well, I'd like to maybe just do maybe 6 or maybe 12 figures." And I said, well, why don't we do this? I said, most of those guys you're talking about have had figures in another line.
Yeah.
So I would like to go back and tell the story of professional wrestling when it started on TV,
Hmm.
on the DuPont network out of Chicago, 1950. You got guys like Yukon Eric, Don Leo Jonathan, Wilbur Snyder, Harbold Haggerty, Hans Schmidt, Tiny Mills, people that really built the industry.
Right.
And my father became the biggest star on network TV. He had just come out of wrestling on the Olympics in 1948, turned pro in 49. in 50, he hit the scene in Chicago. And they would bring Lou Thez, who was the NWA champion, in, you know, once every 3 months or so. And Vern was on every week. And he really caught on along with Pat O'Connor and Wilbur Snyder as you know, the good guys, the baby faces.
Right.
And he was the first athlete besides Babe Ruth in that era in 1950 and made over 100 grand.
Wow. Wow.
So, you know, and that ran for 7 years on the Dumont Network. And then Vern partnered up in Minneapolis because that was his hometown and bought into the Minneapolis Wrestling Association at that time in 1960. And then from there created the AWA, and his job was to expand the territory, and he got TV in all those markets, you know, from Winnipeg, Minneapolis, Omaha, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, all the towns in there, and then Illinois, oh God, Denver, Salt Lake City, San Francisco, Phoenix, Las
Amazing.
Vegas, and all across Canada.
And
So we were huge.
you were huge. So really quickly, territory marks, Paul and I focus on the territories. Our love of the territories, specifically in the 80s. Sometimes we toe dip into the 70s, sometimes the 90s, but our heart is in the territory wrestling. And we focus on AWA and world class and big,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, Florida championship and
Okay.
Mid-South, et cetera, et cetera. And you have been an integral part of our show. We covered a High Flyers match
Did
against the
you?
Road Warriors, I believe, back
Uh-huh.
in. Um, it was right before Jim Brunzell, I think, joined the WWF
Uh,
at the time. And actually, we have an upcoming match we're covering of yours with against Kurt Hennig.
that was fun.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, look, there is so much to talk about, and I am a toy fanatic. I still have my Remco figures.
We really.
I sure do. I still have the ring and the ring posts. My son, who's now 9, was playing with that when he was 3. And I always loved the Remco line more than the LJN or all the other stuff because they were more posable and flexible, right? And so, my son's like, "Who's this?" I'm like, "Oh, that's Rick Martel. Who's that? Oh, that's Road Warrior Hawk," et cetera, et cetera. Um, but on our show, we also have non-wrestling fans that listen as well.
Mhm.
And so they go, I only know the current product, or I only know what I see on
Right.
highlight reels or Twitter or whatnot. So they're learning a lot from us, Paul and I.
Well,
And
well, I'm glad, John, because that's kind of what we're doing too. You know,
yeah, yeah, totally. What you're doing with Magnum sounds fantastic.
you got to paint the picture of what really started and built wrestling. You know, everybody thinks it's Vince McMahon. They were just a part of it up on the East Coast. They had
right,
the bigger markets, but we were expanded everywhere. And with ESPN, we were the first national show.
right.
And went across Canada with that. They would tape our matches in Winnipeg and then play it across Canada the following week. And, you know, at one time in the AWA, our rating, there was only one show that beat us nationally, and that was 60 Minutes.
Wow.
We had a 24 rating with
24.
with a 64 share of the audience.
Wow.
60 Minutes had a 24 rating and a 65 share of the audience. So, I mean, you know, and we only wrestled 250 days out of the year, maybe. Whereas these other territories, they ran every single day, 362 days out of the year, plus doubles on Saturdays
Right.
and
No
Sundays.
breaks.
So Vern always gave, because May was slow in Minnesota and in the northern tier states. People wanted to get outdoors, they wanted to go in the arenas. So we had to get the whole month of May and the first 2 weeks of June off. In the summer, we only ran maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And then
Wow.
from the end of September to the end of April, it was full go. But, you know, Vern was a family man and he wanted this talent to be able to spend time with their families.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we always got the best talent there. They wanted to come to the AWA.
You sure did. I was talking to my son the other day about it. And I said, Bodie, I said, if it wasn't for AWA, we wouldn't have some of the names that everybody knows about nowadays.
Yeah.
AWA was a benchmark. I want to talk about you specifically though, because I think I think our listeners will be fascinated by your story because obviously your father, Vern, is AWA, but how did you get your start? I mean, obviously, I think it's one of those questions people go, oh, yeah, of course you became a wrestler, but how did Greg Gagne become Greg Gagne, the wrestler?
Well, when I was young, I wanted to become either a football player or a baseball player and really concentrated on those two sports. But my dad would always have me wrestle with him in the living room. He'd move all the furniture away and then show me, how to get out of holes, how to get into holes. And most of the time it was very frustrating for me because when he'd show me something, I'd go to do it, he'd reverse it and crank me up. And my mother used to get so mad, so mad. So those were my interests. And I played football at Minnesota for a year. I went there as a quarterback. I was a walk-on. Murray Warmath was the coach at that time, and his philosophy was he gave one Minnesota kid a scholarship, and the rest he would get us to walk on. And then he would recruit from outstate and get the black athletes in there.
Okay.
And so we'd scrimmage every week, and it'd be the Minnesota kids against the recruits, and we beat them every single week. And we had a great running back, a couple of them, and one was Jeff Wright out of Edina. And I remember the first time I handed him the ball, he went 60 yards for a touchdown.
Wow.
And I could throw the ball well. So we were beating him every week. So spring game we won. We get to the fall practice, and Murray Warmath moves Jeff Wright, the running back, to a safety and me to a cornerback. And we had back then the Big Ten was big linemen, big running backs. We had Jim Carter, fullback, 6'4", 235 pounds.
Wow.
Barry
Gosh.
Mayer was 6'2", 220.
Wow.
And so we had two calls for the defense, for the defensive backs. One was Cora and one was Sally. Sally meant the safety came up and broke up the end runs.
Okay.
Cora was for the cornerback, which was me, to come up and break up the end runs. So getting our scrimmage, of course, Jeff calls Cora, Cora, I got to go up and break up the end run.
Right.
So I get by Barry Mayer, and then I hit Carter, and he kind of ran over me and ran for a touchdown.
Okay.
Murray Warmath, hey, run that play again. He was from Tennessee. He had that accent. So they ran it again, and I went up and I hit him, and shoot, I rolled over, and he stepped on me, and he
Oh, no.
stumbled, fell about 5 yards. So Murray says, run that play again. Come on, Gagne, hit him. So I came up, and this time I stuck my head right in his thigh.
Oh.
The next thing I remember, as I was on the sideline with Jim Marshall, our trainer, and Jim, we're down on one knee, and Jim says, come on, Greg, we got to go in the locker room now. Practice is over. I said, but look at the elephants and the clowns out here. Let's go in. Concussion number one.
Right. Right.
So anyhow, I ended up, then I transferred to Wyoming, played quarterback out there. And when I came back this was a funny story. We come out, Christmas, we get our break. Then we have spring practice. So I go home, and I'm 21, 22 years old now. And I get home, and Vern says, come on, let's go downstairs, move the furniture. And my mom screaming, no, you're not going to do that. Come on, get down here. So we get down, and he shows me a few moves, and then we start wrestling, and he keeps breaking me down. And finally I give him an elbow in the nose, and he squeezed me, cracked a rib.
Oh no.
Yeah. So now I got to go back to Wyoming, and now we're starting the spring practice. We're still
Oh
in
no.
practice. And I come out, and the coach said, wait, what the hell's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Well, I hurt myself. Well, what happened? Well, I had to wrestle my dad, and he cracked my rib. Of course, that was a big story the rest of the year in Wyoming.
Right. Right.
So I was wrestling. I wasn't not so much on my junior year. I was playing basketball.
Okay.
And one of the weight classes, it was like 135 or 137, something like that, got hurt, and he needed a guy to wrestle on the team. So I went down, and I said, well, I'll try out for the team. He said, well, you're playing basketball. So I can do both. And so he made me wrestle every weight class. And I pinned everybody, including the heavyweight.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And then the basketball coach, he blew up. And so I had to end up staying with him and playing that. But and the wrestling coach wanted me to cut from 165 to 137, which is with it. And I went home and told my dad, he said, no, you can't lose that kind of weight.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. So I went back and finished basketball. So how we get into professional wrestling?
Yeah.
Well, my dad trained 144 wrestlers over the years,
Right.
which is more than anybody,
It's insane.
It is. Gene, Ole, Anderson, Larry Henning, Kurt Henning, Ricky Steamboat, Ric
Right.
Flair. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And only about maybe 6 of the 144 didn't make main event level. So anyhow, the 72 Olympics, he was sponsoring Ken Patera.
Okay.
So we went over to the Olympics, and after that, he was going to turn Ken pro. There was a kid over there named Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik. And this Alan Rice, who was a sponsor of the U.S. Olympic team with my dad, he said, this Khosrow, he wants to be a pro wrestler. So he talked to him, and he said, well, we'll have a camp coming up in September. And we've got Ken Patera, we got that. And I said, well, Dad, I'd like to wrestle. And he said, well, what makes you think you can wrestle? I said, well, I drop kicked Ole Anderson in the living room one day. You had me do that. You had me work out with all those guys. I'd like to give it a shot. He says, well, you're a little small. And I said, well, I'm lifting. I'll put on weight. He said, okay. And so then I called my partner, Jim Brunzell, who played football with at Minnesota. I said, Jim, we got a camp coming. He was playing semi-pro football. Jim said, God, I never wrestled. I said, well, you're an athlete. Christ, you set a high jump record in the state of Minnesota, teach you how to drop kick.
Right.
So then we had Patera, Brunzell, myself, the Iron Sheik, Bob Bruggers, who Wahoo McDaniels played football with in San Diego or Denver. I can't remember.
Okay.
And he said he'd be a good wrestler. He's a great athlete. But Bob was a little older. He was 33 at the time, so a little tougher for him going through the camp.
Right.
And then Ric Flair. Rick knew Ken Patera, and Rick went with the college with Jim and I, played on the football team. He was a non-predictor. He never dressed one game.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But Rick was Rick from when I knew him back in college.
Oh, I'm sure he was.
He joined a fraternity called the Phi Delts. There were some of the football players in there, and then the Beta Houses where Jim and I were with some of the other athletes, other football players. Spring comes up, summer, September. First day, the sororities and the fraternities would get kind of together for parties. So Flair's in this Delta house. And as the story goes, which we were told by the ladies from one of the sororities, they come up the sidewalk. And this is a little bit later in the fall. We had a little snow. And the girls are coming up the sidewalk and get all these freshmen. And here is Flair. Window open on the second floor of this building, of the Delta house. He's stark ass naked, one light bulb over him. And he's going, woo, ladies. Who wants a ride on Space Mountain?
No.
Well, the freshman girls took off running. But those veterans, they came in, and I'm sure he gave a few of them a ride on Space Mountain.
Wow.
So Rick never played it down to football at Minnesota, but he's a projected All-American.
Yeah, I'm sure he was.
So we got him into the camp.
Yeah.
And we went out into the barn. My dad had this old barn, no windows. It was on the second floor, the hay floor, and he kept horses downstairs and a horse corral outside. And we would go 6 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was the hardest thing any of us ever did.
What time of the year is this, by the way?
Well, we started in September and we ran until March 1st.
Oh my gosh, in the wintertime.
Oh yeah, it'd be 10, 15 below zero. We'd be out there.
Oh.
We'd wear these sweatsuits, and we had to start out, the first hour was calisthenics.
Okay. First
We had to do
hour.
it. Yep. And we had to build up to do 1,000 free squats nonstop.
1,000?
Took us 37 minutes to do them when we finally got to it.
Oh my gosh.
We started out with like, 4 sets of 25 and then built up to that. And
Oh,
then you had other outside the ring uh, things that we did, and then stuff in the ring. We go in and you do a sit-up, you'd be on all fours, and then guy would sit on your back and he would face the opposite way and hook his feet in between your groin.
right.
And he'd do a sit-up and push your neck down, and then you had to push him back up with your neck. And
Oh
we had
my
to alternate. So,
gosh.
I'd get Patera, who was 340 pounds on my back.
Right.
Flair was 290 at the time.
Oh,
And we went around the ring like that. And then the second hour was basically bumps, learning how to protect yourself.
right.
And we would do that for an hour.
Wow.
You'd start out to learn how to absorb the punishment. You'd have to land flat. Your body all has to hit at the same time, feet down flat, so you can get your ass up off the ground so you don't hurt your tailbone,
Right.
and keep your chin tucked in so you didn't knock yourself out, which a couple of guys did that while we got knocked out and
Right.
Hasbro a number of times. And then we'd hit the ropes, learn how to hit them, and that would tear the skin off from about here all the way down.
Oh my gosh.
So we'd be black and blue, and it would last about 6 weeks. Vern would tell us. He said it'll all go away, and it did. And your body gets so hard, you can't believe the punishment that you take, and we wouldn't feel things that we, before it'd grab you. Ow!
Yeah.
And now it's unbelievable. My wife saw the transition, and she happened to open a cupboard door one night and hit me in the head, and it cut me open. And she looked at me, and I said, "You got to watch when you open the door." She said, "You didn't feel that? You're bleeding."
My gosh.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what that does to you. So that was the second hour. The third hour would be learning how to tie up and holds and counter holds. And that'd go into the fourth hour. The fifth hour, God, what was that? God, it would just be more holds generally. And then the last hour, we would run. We'd run sprints. He was on a lake, and it was about a quarter mile to half mile down to the lake.
Okay.
We'd sprint 10 yards, walk 10 yards, sprint 10 yards, come back to the barn. He'd take us across the street, some other land he had, and it was on the Minnesota River bluffs and the clay cliffs. And we'd have to run up and down those. And it'd take an hour, and we'd come back in the dark when it got to be, later in the year. There was Patera and Flair. He'd be about 5 to 10 minutes behind us.
Right. Yeah.
He'd be chewing their butts up. Come on, pick it up, pick it up.
Those guys are like 100 pounds more than you are practically,
Oh, well,
right?
Rick I think he was at 292 when he came in, and about 260 when he left the camp.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Patera went from 340 to 300.
Wow.
Yeah. And the rest of us put on a little weight,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was funny. But as we got going, God, he had these drills. We got into there in January and February. We'd have sweatsuits on, do the squats, be sweating our butts off. And then he'd have us get up, and we'd have 4 guys on the ring apron, 1 guy in the middle, the 5th guy would go in, and Vern would say, "You're the lead guy.
Yeah.
So you got to stay in there, go through each one of us for about 3 to 4 minutes, and it's pretty much nonstop." So Vern would say, "Tie up, headlock, take over, kick out, grab that head, shoot the ropes, tag 2 tackles, leapfrog, reverse monkey flip, arm drag, cover them, 1, 2, kick out."
Gosh.
And you go for it nonstop. The guy in the middle for 3 to 4 minutes with each guy. So you're in there for 20 minutes.
Right.
And you'd get at the end of the line, and you're just wringing wet, and it's 20 below zero. And by the time you got to the front of the line, your sweatsuit was froze to you.
Yeah.
Then he'd call body slam. You'd go in there, and you felt like the cartoon character. You'd feel all the ice in your sweatsuits go. So we were pretty hardcore when we came out of there.
Yeah. I bet you were.
I'm sorry, the last hour was some,
You're like, there's more.
yeah, 6th hour was submission wrestling before we did the running.
Oh, wow.
And that was with Billy Robinson and Vern, the two of
Okay.
them.
Wow.
And
Okay.
they'd show us about 4 moves. And then we'd have to, one would get down with Vern and one with Billy. And then, he'd put the arm out for you. He said, there's the arm. Now, you're supposed to put the hold on. And as we do it, they reverse it and crank your foot right back of your head.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, it was something else. It
And
was the hardest thing we ever did.
were there times when you're like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. Or did that ever enter your
Oh,
mind?
Flair quit twice. He's the only one that quit. He Vern didn't know this, but we had him convinced that to finish the camp, we had to dive out of the second-story window and do a backdrop into the frozen horse crap down in the thing. So all of a sudden, one day, we're teasing Rick every day. God, how we make that dive out of there? Well, Jesus Christ, I'm not going to be able to do that. So he came, he didn't show up, and we lived in a duplex, and it was Patira, Bruggers, and myself on one side, Flair and his wife in the other. So we get to camp, and Vern says, "Where's Flair?" And I said, "He quit." He said, "What do you mean he quit?" I
Oh
said, "He
no.
quit. It's too hard for him." He says, "Get going with Billy. Billy, you take over here. I'm going to go get Flair."
Oh no.
Oh yeah. So he goes, he knocks on the door, and his wife Leslie at that time opens the door. He says, "Where's Rick?" "Well, Vern, he quit." "Well, have him come out and see me."
Oh no.
So Rick came out in the front yard, and here's the way we got the story. Vern's talking to him, "Rick, you can't quit." "Vern, I can't handle it. I just can't handle it. I can't do the things that you're asking me to do." He said, "Well, you're doing them all, and you're going to do everything I tell you to do." "No, I quit." And Vern open handed him, knocked him right on his ass. He said, "Get up and get in my car," and then drove him back out to camp.
Wow.
Brought him out there. And then about maybe 3, 4 weeks later, he did it again, and same thing. Vern went open handed and knocked him on his ass, brought him back to camp, said, "You're not quitting." So, that was a different era back then.
I mean, that's what I tell my son when it comes to like discipline and whatnot, because nowadays you talk to your
Oh,
kids, right? And you have
yeah.
conversations and it's about emotions and social emotional. I said, well, I'm at that stage in my life too where I'm like, in my day,
Right. Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 47. So,
Oh, yeah.
and my dad was a former Navy SEAL and a
Oh,
firefighter.
yeah. You went through all that.
So
Yep.
my dad was like, his motto was your best day was yesterday, basically.
Oh, those guys were hardcore back then. Boy, it was boot camp.
Oh my gosh, no kidding, it was boot camp. But what you got put through, Paul has an academy, Kayfabe Academy now, where he's teaching young people and it's really instilling the love of maintaining kayfabe in this day and
Mhm.
age, which is very challenging to do.
Without a
But
doubt.
what you guys are doing back then, it's insane to even fathom. My dad went through Hell Week as a Navy SEAL. This sounds like hell 6 weeks.
Oh, it was. And I mean, we went from, September 1st till uh the
You said
first couple
March, right?
April 1st. Yeah, I think end of March, I think some of the guys started. Vern kept me back
Okay.
for a month. So they all started then.
And
It
did
was
he did he keep you with Jim Brunzell, or were you guys like,
well,
is that always the yeah.
Jim ended up going to Kansas City. Vern sent him down there
Okay.
to break in. He usually sent guys to different territories.
Yeah,
And you know, Flair stayed here a while, then he sent him to the Crockett's. And of course, once he got there, he never left.
right.
Uh, you know, Vern created talent and it was really amazing to us because they said when Jim finally came back, they teamed us up. And we got booked. Jim Barnett was a good friend of my dad's, and he was running World Championship Wrestling at the time down in Atlanta. And they wanted Jim and I to come in and wrestle Cowboy Bob Orton and Dick Slater for the tag team title they had down in Georgia.
Okay.
They wanted us for 2 weeks. So the first night we get there, a guy named Brute Bernard, and he was kind of a rugged old bastard. And he didn't like my dad because my dad had never used him because he wasn't the kind of wrestler Vern wanted in the AWA. You had to have a background, and he was just kind of a punch and kicker, So Jim and I sat down next to him, and he turned to me and he says, "Your dad is I won't say the word, a sucker with a C before it." And I said, "Well, maybe he thinks the same thing about you."
Mm.
And he looked at me, and Jim looked at me, and I went, "Well, here we go." And it was funny when we left the camp. Vern told us all. He took the 6 of us. You don't have to be afraid of anybody. You guys don't know how hard, how physical you are, and how prepared you are. You can defend yourself against no matter how big they are.
I love that.
So now Group Bernard gets up, and him and his manager walk into the other locker room. I said to Jim, "Come on." So we went in and walked in and sat down next to him again. I said, "Do you have a problem with me?"
Whoa.
He says, "No." And he shook my hand.
Wow.
And that's when it set in with Jim and I that, coming from Vern's school, these guys are a little leery of what we can do.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding. I mean, it's not just a different territory. It's a whole other different mentality, right?
It is. So anybody that came out of Vern's school had the respect immediately, and it usually took talent 5 to 10 years to become a main event wrestler. We were at 3 years.
Yeah.
When we all of us hit it. And a couple, even I think Flair maybe a little earlier in Charlotte. But it was very interesting. So then we went in and we wrestled Dr. Jerry Graham and Rip Hawk. And they were kind of at the end of their career.
Yeah.
And they told us, you guys, maybe 5 minutes with these guys. Columbus, Georgia. Nobody's gonna know who we are when we get in there.
Right.
We got in there and we wrestled 25 minutes with them and tore the place apart on the second match on the card. And we're building up for Orton and Slater. And the booker at that time, I think it was Gary Hart, he came in and was screaming at us, "What are you doing?" "What do you mean, what are we doing? We had a wrestling match."
Right.
"Yeah, but Jesus Christ, how my guy's going to follow that one? You can't do that." We said, "Well, that's what we do." And the next 2 weeks, they booked us with Bob Backlund and Jerry Briscoe in clean matches.
Wow. Wow.
And what they paid us at the end of the 7 days, was $500. And the second week was the same thing. I went into Barnett and I said, "Jim, we're missing Denver and Chicago and all the big markets. And we make more than that in one night in those places.
Right.
This is, and why aren't we wrestling Orton and Slater?" "Well, they just don't want the manager or my booker doesn't want you to get in the ring with them." I said, "Why?
Why? Yeah.
We'll have a heck of a match with them." "Well, he's worried about it." And I said, "Well, we're going home."
Wow. So you're basically getting punished for the fact that you were doing great.
Yeah. Isn't it?
Yeah.
The same thing happened in New York. I went up there and they had me on the second or third match with Johnny Rods. And we wrestled 14 minutes and I came out with the win, but we had the people standing. And I came out and Vince Sr. says to me, "What was that?" And I said, "That was wrestling. How am my guys going to follow it?" I said, "That's their problem."
So were people afraid to come up to the AWA then at that point? I mean,
the top guys weren't. They all wanted to get there because they knew it was, for them, it was like a country club. You're on the road a lot, but 250 days compared to 350 days and twice on Saturday and Sunday, you get to spend time with your family. And we only ran with 16 or 18 guys on a card, sometimes 14. Wow. You're selling out these buildings. Our paydays were, very generous.
Right.
Everybody from top to bottom, even the bottom guys were making better living than some of the top guys in some of the other territories.
Okay.
So that's why everybody wanted to come there. And, Vern ran it with a iron fist, do it his way. but he wanted guys that wanted to compete and wanted to, get in the ring and have a match. And that's where we had all that best talent there. I mean, some of we were very fortunate to be around those people and learning, with Bobby Heenan, Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, Blackjack Lanza, even Larry Henning
Right.
and God, Billy Robinson. I mean, everybody there, and they were all willing to take us after a match and tell us what we did wrong. Uh, and
I
what
I
we
gotta
should have
ask
done.
you, I gotta ask you though, with your relationship with Jim Brunzell, because he obviously you basically, I wouldn't say you pushed him into wrestling, but you said you opened the door for him, and you
Yeah.
guys have this tag team. Um, how did he receive that? With you? Like, did your relationship only improve as time went on? Because you guys were so fluid in the ring, so tight.
Well, we thought alike, we were trained that way and giving for one another. Some guys get the ego and they think they're the star, and we didn't have any of that. We learned that in the camp. No
Right.
ego. Put the ego aside, guys. You're here to have the best match you can possibly have with your opponents
Yeah.
and make it exciting and thrilling for the people.
And you
And
and you
that's what we
did.
did.
I mean, you put on, like I said, we highlighted a match that you had against the Road Warriors,
Well,
where
those were
Paul Ellering interfered, and I think he busted you open pretty good, and uh, but what was remarkable to Paul and I during that match was how balanced it felt. You're battling these two massive
monsters.
monsters
Yeah,
which I loved. You cut a promo, you and Jim cut a promo prior to the match, and you're basically saying, these guys are all muscle. These guys are all in the gym, and we can move around, and that muscle's going to get tight as the minutes go by. Basically, is what you say. And I love that because it's something that's just lost, and I think in today's,
it is. Yeah,
and I think that's why on Territory Marks we focus on the 80s and the 70s of wrestling, because it was a time when that mattered, and it should matter,
it
right?
should. And that's what we learned. I mean, you're going to run into these big guys, and they're going to want to run over you. And logically, what are the people going to think? Well, Gagne and Brunzell aren't going to beat these two monsters.
Right.
The longer the match goes, the better opportunity we have.
Right.
So that's the story we try to tell in the ring. Keep them moving. And we blow those guys up a lot of times.
I know, I could tell.
One night, Animal, he had really clobbered me. And I got him really moving, and I got him down in the Indian deathlock. I'm gonna kill you. Let me out of here. I'm gonna kill you, you son of a bitch. I'm gonna kill you, you little shit. And I said, "You're not going anywhere." And he sat up, and I slapped him as hard as I could.
That's amazing. That's
And I did it
amazing.
about 3 times to him. But his legs were so big, I didn't have to put much pressure on it, and I could crack an ankle on him real quick.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we just put the pressure on him. So I mean, guys would test you in the ring like that, and fortunately enough, we were trained to know what to do. And we knew we weren't the biggest guys. So how are we going to make the people believe this?
Right.
We've got to blow them up.
Yeah.
Got to
Which you
keep them
did.
moving. Tell the story, and that's what we tried to do.
Well, that's something that I love about watching matches from your career, and you as a singles performer, you as a tag team performer, whether it be with Jim Brunzell, or there was one match that I was watching with Jimmy Snuka, you and Snuka versus Brody
Uh,
and
oh,
Nord.
Barbarian.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in a cage, and Vern was waiting on the outside for his, what is it, 15 minutes or so with Al
the
Casey,
sheep.
the
Yeah,
Sheik. Yeah. And but what's amazing about that match is the Brody and Nord are not made to look less than. They're still dominant monsters, but you guys are
Mhm.
so smart and wise in the ring, and it totally makes sense.
We wrestled Brody and Hansen in Japan in a tag team tournament. We went
You
over
and
there for
Snuka, or you and
well,
Brunzel?
Jim and I,
Okay.
and we went over there and it was a 2-week tournament. And the night before we were in Salt Lake City in a cage match. And I got thrown over the top rope by Jerry Blackwell. And boy, it just tore my knee apart.
Oof.
I woke up in the morning, it's like that big.
Oof.
And we flew from Salt Lake to LA, and I had the flight attendants put ice on my knee. Flew from LA to Tokyo, more ice on the knee. Flew from Tokyo to Sapporo. 19 hours we'd been in the ring.
Oh my
We got to
gosh.
Sapporo and a cab picked us up. We had to get dressed in the ring. And I taped my knee up. We had to go right in, and we had our first match, and it wasn't a tournament match. We won that in about 14 minutes. The next night we wrestled Giant Bubba and Dory Funk Jr., who was the NWA heavyweight champion at the time. 45 minutes, and we won that match.
Oh my gosh.
The next night we have Tenaru and Saruta. We wrestled 50 some minutes and got my knee taped up, killing me. 55 minutes, we won that match. Then we get Hanson and Brody. We never experienced these two guys before.
Okay.
Get in the ring, and I'm talking to Jim like this. God, what are we going to do with these two guys? Man, they're athletes. They move and all that. And we're talking. All of a sudden, the people erupt. And here they come into the ring. And I look and I said, Jesus, look out. I got hit with a cowbell. He got hit with the chain. Out of the ring we go. They come out after us. They run us through the crowd into a brick wall, hit us with a fire extinguisher. We're both cut up. And we're fighting back to the ring. And I see this little Japanese guy jump up and this chair folds down. So I grab it, and Hanson's running at us, and I fire it like a frisbee and hit him right on the nose. Exploded his nose.
Oh no.
We wrestled these guys for 32 minutes like this.
Oh my gosh.
And I'd never been in the ring with Brody before. I had Hanson, I think, once or twice. And it was just nonstop. And finally, we had a spot where I came off the top rope. Brody had Jim, and I came off with an elbow and knocked Brody to his knees. And all of a sudden, I see Hanson throw Brunzell over the top rope. And Brody is on his hands and knees, and he bear hugs me with my arms trapped in like this. And Hanson hits me with the lariat.
Oh.
And that was about 38 minutes into the match. And that was the last thing I remember. They won that match. And then we won the rest of our matches. And we had to meet those two in the championship match in the Tokyo Dome. I mean, and when these guys they're heroes over there. And we won that match.
Wow.
And when I got home, went right in for surgery. They opened my knee up. The cartilage fell out in 5 pieces. So I wrestled that whole time with that. So then Brody came to the AWA.
Right.
So they booked him with Sergeant Slaughter. He gets in the ring with Slaughter. Halfway through the match, he walks out. He says to Vernon Wally Carbo, how'd you like that one? Well, what are you doing? Stomped into the locker room. I don't want to wrestle him. He said, then a month later, does the same thing with Blackwell. Well, who do you want to wrestle? And he points to me. And I said, I don't want to wrestle you.
No,
alone.
you just had surgery.
So I ended up having, for some reason, he took me, he said, because you fight back.
Mm.
You don't, no matter what size you are. I mean, I wrestle big guys and they're afraid. He said, you just battle me and you hit me hard, and that's what I want. And I said, shit, I don't want to be alone with him in the ring. So that's when I brought Snuka in. We made it a tag team match.
I mean, it makes sense on paper because Brody is such a imposing figure.
Oh.
And I've described you in the past on the show as you reminded me as a very relatable wrestler to the viewing public. Like, that guy looks like me. I can do this, versus Brody, who looks like a monster made by Universal Studios, So
Yeah, exactly.
and so I think that's what I love that. I love a David and Goliath story. I always have, and this really felt like that. Um,
It
but
was.
I'm still flashing back to you in Japan flying all over the place with this blown up knee. You're lucky that you didn't like it wasn't worse.
Oh, I know it. Yeah. Well, I've had well, both knees operated on. I've had 5 back surgeries, and now they want to do a shoulder replacement and another back surgery, and I'm trying to avoid them.
Oh my gosh. Like my question to you is so you know this is at a time you injure your knee against Brody at I wouldn't say at the twilight of your career. You're in the middle of your career at this point, right?
Yeah, well, and I never really recovered from that knee surgery. It took me 9 months to get back to the inn. And when I did, I never really got back into the kind of shape I was in to really control a wrestling match,
Okay.
and then that's when you start getting more injuries. And of course, I was older too. I was in my mid 30s.
I got to
So,
say though, you had a match against, and I mentioned it earlier. You had a match. It was July of '87, and we just covered this match on the show, and it will be airing right before your interview airs. When this interview airs,
uh,
it was at the Showboat against then at the time champion Kurt Hennig.
Kurt
Uh,
Hennig.
and at the end, Ray Stevens comes in to save the day because Zabisco interferes. But you guys put on, I think it was maybe a 14-minute match, 12-minute match, something like that. It is nonstop. Uh, the at one point, Kurt's bouncing all over the place.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Kurt during that time and your series of matches with him?
Well, Kurt was, my father trained Larry, and then Kurt went through the school. At that time, Vern had turned over the training, a lot of it to Brad Ringens, and then I would go out and work out with the guys occasionally because I was back on the road.
Okay.
I worked out with Kurt quite a bit, and it was coming from the background. I guess the people I see that are sons following the fathers, they usually have a pretty good natural feel for it and a love for it, and they catch on a lot quicker than guys that come in and just want to be a wrestler.
Yeah.
And Kurt was a fast learner and real quick. And we had a match in Minneapolis. Kurt and I think he was the champion then. And of course, Larry was in his corner and Vernon in my corner. And it was, we looked at each other and we said, why don't they just get in the ring and wrestle? They're screaming at us what to do and do this. And it was driving us absolutely crazy.
I bet.
Yeah. Don't hit him, hit him. Oh, Jesus, my God. Larry's yelling at Kurt and Burns yelling at me and going, oh my God. So, but we got through it. But it would have been better if they'd just left us alone in there.
Right.
We both, I think we could have had a pretty good match. We had a pretty good one, but not the way we wanted to have it.
Well, I tell you, it's a highlight for me. Whether it's your singles career or your tag team career, there's so many great matches that we've talked about bringing up on the show, and we will because we only do one match a month.
Mhm.
So it's hard, we can't get to
Yeah.
every single one at a time. But I did really quickly want to touch on one match you had, you and Jim against Rick Martel and Tito Santana. This is way
Mhm.
before Strikeforce, and it's a single shot that you can find the match on YouTube, and it is like a single camera shot where it'll
Where
zoom
was
in
it
and
out of Minneapolis
I
or?
think it was. I think it was. And the finish was I think Tito has you up for like an atomic drop and
Oh
you
yeah.
reach back
Hey,
and grab Jim for the tag and the blind tag. It's flawless. It's a masterpiece, really. Did you wrestle those guys a lot?
we wrestled them one other time in San Francisco,
Okay.
and this is probably my one of my most favorite matches because of the way it went.
Oh, great. Okay.
The Cow Palace, big building,
I lived in San Francisco, so I'm
Oh,
totally
so
familiar
you
with it.
know okay.
Yep.
So we come out and, you know, it was probably three-quarters full.
Okay.
And we come out to wrestle them, and Martel, we're the champions. Martel and Santana go out first. And as they go out, the people are going, boring, bullshit, boring,
Wow.
bull. We go, God almighty, this might not be so hard after all,
Right.
right? They love us. We walk out, boring, bullshit.
No.
God almighty, we get in the ring and we're looking at them and getting the instruction of what the, you know. So for 18 minutes, Tito and Rick had, I think, an arm lock on us. And we would fight out of it, and we would do some spot and they'd get us back into it,
Right.
back into the arm. Boring bullshit. This went on for 18 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
We're supposed to go maybe 20 minutes with the
Okay.
match. At 18 minutes, we've got them standing. So we wrestled 45 minutes.
Whoa, really?
We kept them on their feet that entire time after that. It went from boring bullshit to it was just the crowd erupted. They were on their feet. We had them boom, 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 boom going like
Awesome.
that, not knowing what was going to happen. And we came back in the locker room. Everybody in the locker room came up to us that night.
Right.
Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, Jerry Blackwell, Baron Von Raschke, Vern at the end. You guys, that was masterful. That was the greatest match we've ever seen.
Oh, that's amazing.
You took that crowd, and it was funny because the guys coming after us had a real tough time following it. And it was a clean babyface match, never
Yeah.
a punch thrown. So that one kind of set the pace. The one in Minneapolis was a little shorter.
Mhm.
People, but you know, that is the art of the sport, is trying to get those people emotionally involved in your match, in
Right.
your feelings,
Right.
letting them feel what you're feeling. And when you can do that, you really, then it's fun. It's so much fun.
I'm gonna put the link at least to the match that the shorter match in Minneapolis
Uh-huh.
in the show notes to this episode so people can watch it. And another brilliant thing about it is it never spills outside of the ring. It's always in the ring. And it's
Yeah.
just a classic example of what you can do. I don't think people are familiar with that anymore, and
No, they're not.
but it's beautiful to watch, and I'm so glad that you consider the match at the Cow Palace one of your favorite matches ever,
Yeah.
because I love that man. I love the one you did in Minneapolis. So against those guys, it
Yeah.
was fantastic.
I still, the one in San Francisco, though, I mean, because the crowd was it was so hard. And it was
San
so,
Francisco can be tough. I mean, there's
it
like a
was,
biker contingency up there that's pretty
you
tough.
hear them, every move you make, bullshit, boring.
Wow.
Well, just stay with it, and boom, boom, boom. You could feel them coming. About 15 minutes, or you're not getting that. And at 18 minutes, we got them standing, and they almost stood for the rest of the match.
That's amazing. That is
And we walked
amazing.
out, they just erupted. I mean, it was pretty amazing because when you get guys like, you know, the guys that were in the locker room, they come in and tell you, guys, that was the masterpiece. You know, no, then you know you've really learned your craft well and presented it well to the public.
That's awesome. I love it. I will tell you really quickly, because I lived up in the Bay Area for a number of years. My stepdad was born and raised up there, and he went to see the band Rainbow, Richie Blackmore's Rainbow in Oakland, which is just over the bay, right from San
Yeah,
Francisco.
we wrestled there too. Yeah.
Okay, so a young guy named Johnny Cougar was opening for Rainbow. No one had ever heard of this guy, but he had a song on the radio called "I Need a Lover That Won't Drive Me Crazy," and comes out to a biker crowd who wants to see this metal band,
Right.
Rainbow. And he's shaking his butt and he's dancing around. And if anyone's familiar with that song, it's got like a 2 minute intro of
Uh-huh.
no vocals. It just keeps going and going. And the crowd starts booing him and screaming
Yeah.
things and throwing things at the stage. And he starts to sing, and he mid through the song, he stops and he goes, "I'm never coming back to this effing town ever again," drops the mic and walks off. My point in saying that is
Yeah.
You didn't give up like John Mellencamp did.
Yeah. You know what? You can't, it's kind of fun. Another one, this was really a turning, I mean, the turning point early in my career. They sent Bob Bruggers and I to Japan,
Okay.
6 weeks tour, and they got Blackjack Mulligan, Dale Lewis, Lars Anderson, God, who was the other big, oh, Moose Cholak, and a couple other guys, and then two from South Africa. And Bob Bruggers and I are the rookies. And we're there for 6 weeks, and we're getting $1,000 a week if we're lucky. And the other guys are making 5 or 10 grand a week.
Wow.
So you have to learn your symbol.
Okay.
And you come into the arena and you look at they got it on the wall, and you got to find your symbol and see where you're wrestling on the card. You know, we were the first or second match, and we never knew who we were wrestling until you got out there.
Right.
And the Japanese people, when you would come out, it was the damnedest thing. The geisha girls would be in there, they give you flowers, people, they would clap. Other guy, they'd clap. Match would start dead freaking silent. The whole match.
Oh boy.
Match was over, they would clap and you'd get out. And my dad told me, okay, the first thing you do when you get over there, the first 3 nights, just before you lock up, break the guy's nose, hit him right in the nose. I said, what? He said, do it. I'm telling you. You earn their respect, and you have to earn the Japanese respect.
Wow.
First 3 nights, busted noses. They'd come in the locker room, oh, Mr. Gagne, thank you, thank you. And
Whoa.
Bruggers is looking at me. I said, well, I tell you, you better start doing it. They eat you up. So anyhow, we're in about the fifth, just past our 5th week. Or no, we're into just the end of the 4th week, going into the 5th week. And we go in the locker room, and Bruggers says, I don't see my name up there. I said, well, you got to be. So I'm looking, and I said, oh, shit, you're in the main event. You're in a cage match. You know, we're rookies. Well, I've never been in a cage match. So I went up to Giant Bubba, and I said, Mr. Bubba, could I be a manager for Bob? He doesn't know, never been in a cage match. Okay. So I got, and I just remember Bobby Heenan saying, you got to keep walking because people throw stuff at you. Well, they're doing this. They're dead silent. So Bob's wrestling, and he's getting that shit kicked out of him. He's got up. He's floundering around in there. And I see something on the floor, a little piece of metal. And I said, Bob, I handed it to him. I said, hit down over his eyebrow with this. He hits down and busts the guy open. Now the people are dead silent. All of a sudden they go, whoa. And what the shit? And now they're throwing stuff.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. And then I see this little Japanese guy. He gets over the railing and he's coming. And I turn around, about that whiskey bottle goes by me and hits the cage.
Oh.
I turn to there and I see the guy going over the barrier, and I kick him right in the ass. And over he goes. Well, this place went bananas. So Bob gets beat. I crawl into the ring over the cage. And the people are going nuts. And Bob says, we got to get out of here. I said, shit, they're throwing chairs up, they're hitting the cage and coming in.
Wow.
And I look down, I look up, and one hits me right in the head. And I see the guy that threw it. So I ran up the ropes. I'm on top of the cage. I fire it and hit him right behind the head as he's running.
Oh my gosh.
Every chair in the place. So we go running out, and Mulligan comes running out to help us.
Oh my gosh.
So we got to grab Bob, and we pull him back into the locker room. We get in there, now they're breaking the windows in the locker room, and they got riot squads there. So we had a week and a half left in Japan.
Oh no.
And we are on the front page across Japan the next day about this riot.
Right.
So we went out the night after. Bob and he met some gal. It was an American gal that was doing a stunt over there singing.
Okay.
We went to watch her. All of a sudden, she asked me to dance her. I'm on the dance floor, and all of a sudden, I am surrounded by all Japanese men.
Oh no.
And they're starting to come at me. And Bob gets up, and they're running at us, and we're popping them, and they're going down, and we grab the gal, and we run out, and the streets are full of cabs. So we ran down, and we got in a cab as far down as we could. People are chasing us.
My
We,
gosh.
yeah, we get in the cab, we get back, and it was like that for the rest of the tour. And Bob and I were in the main event every night.
Of course you were. Yeah.
And they had to have riot squads there. And it was funny because Bockwinkel and Stevens went over after we got back, and they came back and said, "What the hell did you guys do over there? The people are they're worse than the crowds over here throwing shit."
Wow.
We got the story. What did you do? And we told them the story. I said, "God Almighty!" And but before that, they'd clap and dead silent through your whole match. It was the damnedest thing.
Did did your pay go up at that point?
They gave us a little bonus at the end.
Okay. I was gonna say, come
Yeah,
on.
but my God, it was. I mean, that was then we were rookies. We were just, we'd have been wrestling our first year.
You're lucky you came back in one piece.
I know we were. We were very
Sincerely.
lucky.
Oh my gosh. I mean, wow, wow. I can talk to you all day, by the way, about these stories, and I love it. As we wrap up really quick, I got to
Can
ask
I
you
do
what.
one quick thing? There's a few left. This is the Vern Gagne. We got Vern, Luthez, Magnum T.A., Brody Hanson, and Kerry Von Erich. Powertown.
Powertown, Powertown
Wrestling
Wrestling.
lives on. You
Yeah.
go there, we got the Remco toys out now, but the wrestlingcollection.com still has a few of these collectibles.
Okay.
So don't miss getting them.
I'm gonna put all the links in our show notes so everybody can go check them out. I ordered quite a few of the Remco figures myself
Did you?
personally.
Good.
Yeah, and I think I asked you specifically. I'm like, are high flyer figures on their way? And you said probably,
Yeah,
possibly,
down
right?
down the road, we've got 255 people on, and the problem is
Right. You
these
mentioned that.
these ultras we can only do 12 a year.
Okay.
Get about every 3 months. The Remcos we can do a little more. That's why we're trying to get more of our talent.
Yeah.
You know, they're all calling and when's my action figure coming out?
Right.
So
I
we're
mean,
working on
yeah.
other merchandise too. So just all your followers out there, go to Powertown. It'll give you anything you want out there.
I have one quick question for you, really, really quick.
Yep.
So Yuki used to come out the Badlands as your theme music, and
That
right?
was Jim.
Okay, that was
That
Jim.
was Jim's deal. He wanted Badlands.
Why?
He's a
Can you tell us
Bruce
why?
Springsteen fan. He's
Okay.
met Bruce a number of times. You you think he was his lover.
I
That's all he ever talks about is Bruce Springsteen. But he loves his music. And so he wanted Badlands. So that's what we did.
what if you had a choice, what song would you want to come out to?
Oh, man. I never really thought about it.
I'm glad I asked it then.
Yeah. What would it be? Some Elvis song, probably.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I had a chance. I was supposed to meet Elvis in Vegas. He made his return to Vegas and was there, and I had two seats right in the front with my girlfriend at that time. And he's a big wrestling fan. And somebody came and said, I said, "I'd like to meet up." So we'll get you back there. Well, it was his first time back, and he did his concert that was unbelievable. He was just, the sweat was pouring off of
I
him.
bet. Yeah.
We got back there and he said he went right to his room, Greg, but he really wanted to tell you hello, and hopefully we meet another time.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Well, I
great
mean,
guy. Yeah.
I love Elvis's music, and that's a great choice for sure. Greg, it was an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for
Thank you
being
for
here.
having me. I really appreciate it. We're in that end of the year of our era, and usually people don't remember us. So I appreciate you taking the time and pushing, what we're doing here with Powertown.
We want to keep this alive and well. The territories are alive and well
Mhm.
here on our show. So thank you. Great.
All right.